Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One-to-One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them. Artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians, each will be one-to-one. Our guest today may no longer be a government official, but her knowledge of its workings makes her an invaluable leader as she continues to advocate for the most vulnerable New Yorkers. I'm so happy to welcome Lilliam Barrios-Paoli, President and CEO of Safe Space New York. She's also Chairwoman of Connect New York. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Lilliam, Safe Space New York describes its mission as working with the city's most disadvantaged children and families, supporting them, trying to keep the children out of foster care, keeping them safe, and helping them grow. So how is your role different from that of the city's Administration for Child Services or organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters or dozens of other nonprofits that also focus on families and children?
Well, you know, in some ways we're not that different. In many ways we are very different. The organization was started about 89 years ago, and the name was the Queensboro Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So we've always been trying to deal with children that have been suffering from abuse and neglect. We contract with the Agency for Children's Services. We have many contracts with them to do preventive services, preventing foster care and abuse and neglect. But we also do a lot of work in schools. We do a lot of work in mental health with very, very young children. We have a program for children under 5 who have been either the witnesses of violence or the victims of violence. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to see how much an 18-month-old that has been, subjected to any kind of violence or witnessed it, has internalized, and what a change it could make in their lives. We also work with families that are engaged in domestic violence. So we try to work with the theme of violence and the theme of prevention.
Mm-hmm. Tell me some of your, you talked about some of your programs. Tell me about some others of your programs, some of your services.
Well, we have 2 drop-in centers for runaway and homeless youth.
Where are they?
One is in Manhattan on 30th Street, and the other one is in Queens, in Jamaica, Queens. And basically it's not only for kids who are homeless, which there are many of them, but also for kids who are, the general issues of adolescence and poverty and substance abuse in many cases. Kids that are questioning who they are and where they're coming from. We have a large number of gay and lesbian youth that basically their parents cannot deal with the issue, they cannot deal with the issue.
And you have support groups for them, that kind of thing?
Yes, and we try to do 2 things. One is to help them with their emotional and physical health, because a lot of these kids, don't go to the doctor when they should, have a lot of questions about their health. Adolescence is a time of profound changes in all of them. We do a lot of things around HIV and HIV maintenance, HIV avoidance. It's a myth that kids, are subjected to HIV because of lack of knowledge. Most kids know. It's just that, they just don't prevent it as much as they could. We do a lot of work with people who already have HIV, both young and not so young, helping them with case management and so on. We try to train them for employment. We have employment and training programs.
How many young people do you see in the course of a year?
Oh, all told, somewhere around between 12 and 15,000 probably, and their families. We try to always engage the families.
But the primary focus is on the children?
Yes. In our adolescent programs, definitely it's on the children. With a very young child, you really have to engage the parents.
What kind of staff do you have?
Well, I have most of my staff is either already an MSW, a Master's in Social Work, or going to get an MSW. But most of them are really focused in social services.
And as you said, you have a lot of interaction with ACS.
Yes.
Where does the money come from your work?
Well, I'd say about 85% of our funding is from government. We have contracts with ACS, with the state equivalent of ACS, which is the Office of Children and Families. We have contracts with the youth serving agency in the city, DYCD. In fact, they fund a drop-in center. We have contracts. We have money from HUD. We run a residence for young people under 24 who are HIV positive.
Where is that?
That is on 47th Street in Manhattan.
And how many young people do you have there?
We have 12 beds, and we're the only program in the city that is specialized on young people with HIV.
Wow.
And many of them, sadly to say, we used to get a lot of kids who had were born with HIV. Now the majority are new infections, and they're young people who, through unsafe sex by and large, or most of them are not coming from intravenous drug using, they're coming from unsafe sex.
And these are adolescents and teenagers, or
yes.
how old?
We get them usually 17, 18 years old, because they have to be ready to really learn how to be on their own. And, you know, as you know, HIV is no longer a death sentence immediately. You know, people live with HIV 20 years.
Right.
So it's how to maintain yourself healthy and productive and have a good life, even if you're infected.
And how long would they live at your residence?
They stay about 2 years usually. Some a little more, some a little less, but we think that 2 years is a good amount of time to really get them stable, both physically and emotionally, and trained in something. We want them to go back to school, or we want them to get a trade so that they can really be self-sufficient.
Right. Now, there is currently a trial going on of the stepfather of Nix Mary Brown, a 7-year-old Brooklyn girl who was terribly abused and allegedly finally beaten to death by her stepfather, quite possibly with the cooperation of her mother. It's a case that became a symbol of the city's failure to protect the most severely at-risk children. And I remember that case and how it led to, as these notorious cases always do, to the announcement of huge reforms at ACS. In your view, is the city doing better? Is ACS doing better? And how would you rate how well it's doing in protecting at-risk children?
I think the city's doing better. I think that the creation of ACS as a separate agency really helped the situation, because, you know, there will be a commission who can focus solely on doing something for the children. I think over time the philosophy of the agency has changed, and I think the understanding now is that you have to prevent foster care. I mean, the scars of being abused are horrendously and physical usually. The scars of foster care are internal and non-visible, but nonetheless severe. And you spend a lot of money with kids in foster care. Why not spend it in trying to make that family stronger? Now, there are cases, like in the case of Nix Mary Brown, where I don't know if that family could have been fixed, quite honestly. And it's a societal issue. I mean, everybody had to play a part. There were neighbors that might have seen and didn't do anything. School saw but didn't do. And that's something that we all have to be trained in. It's the same thing with domestic violence. It's a communal issue, and we all are responsible. You know, poverty is, I think, at the root of everything. You know, it exacerbates situations, it creates hopelessness, it creates violence in the family. And I think that we have to begin to deal with the root causes of a lot of these pathologies that we're witnessing. Clearly, Nix Mary Brown was an extreme case of something that happens, unfortunately, very often in families.
One of the goals, I mean, as you said, of ACS over the years has been to reduce the number of children going into foster care. Is the number down?
Oh yes, way down, way down.
Do you know what the numbers are?
I think the system is way below 16,000 now.
Oh, really?
It's much lower than it has been in.
Because I remember when it was like 40,000.
Yes,
that was sort of the standard number.
And it's come way down. I think it peaked a little. It went higher after the Nix Mary Brown affair, and I think it's partly because I think there's more awareness and people are reporting more, and also people are being cautious.
What is so bad about foster care?
Well, you know, two things. I mean, first of all, the lack of permanency. Children want to know that you're my forever parents. As one of the, we have in this program that we have for very young children under 5, there was a little girl who had been in foster care, and she kept saying that she wanted forever parents. She didn't want just temporary parents.
Right.
So it's that sense of permanency that's really important. Children need to know that they're going to be loved no matter what. And that I think that one of the big issues in foster care is that lack of permanency. Also, you know, as much as you train foster parents, you know, having a child is a very difficult thing.
Right.
It's a very difficult thing when it's your biological child, let alone somebody else's. And although there's wonderful foster parents out there, you know, they can't take the place of the real parent.
Right. And then you also have people who do it for a living, you know, to make money.
Of course. I mean, at one point I remember that 40% of the women who were foster mothers were on welfare. Really? And it was a supplement. And they were caring and loving and giving and everything, but clearly there was something else there.
Right.
And, you know, you can't, you know, no matter how abused a child has been, they always want to see their parents. They always long for the biological connection. And not to say anything about, I mean, adoption can be fabulous as well. because it's permanency and it's good. And, you know, definitely if you cannot be with your biological parents, by all means, adoption is the road to go. But the impermanency, I think, is what absolutely you know, hurts a child.
And I remember in the past, you know, some foster parents talking about how, you know, we put a lock on the refrigerator because the child was stealing food. And it's like, how can you steal food from your home?
Right. Because
you know?
they don't think it's their home. That's
right.
the bottom line. I mean,
right.
and, you know, and can you imagine growing up not feeling that the place that you're in is the place you belong? It's a horrible, horrible thing. And you know, particularly you have a child that has had 7 or 8 or 5 foster homes, you know, with complete instability, grows up in the foster care system. What do you think that child's going to do when they grow up?
Right. Right. Now, you have a lot of people outside of the government, you know, activists and nonprofits like yourself that are very critical of often what the city government is doing. But you worked in city government. What did you learn, which is a whole other thing, you know, when you have to try to, you know, on the other side of this coin. What did you learn from working in city government that contributed to your knowledge of what needs to be done?
Well, you know, first of all, let me say that I have never met smarter people and more dedicated people than the people I met at city government. And there's a wonderful group of people in the not-for-profit. But the people in city government are just up there with them. So that distinction that, you know, you have this boring, not caring bureaucrats is so not true, so not true. So most people who work in city government want to do a good job and care deeply. It's tough, it's difficult. Usually they're very large systems. I mean, you're talking about in ACS, you know, thousands and thousands of workers with billions of dollars in their budget. So to manage it is difficult. To have procedures being followed is difficult. But I've always experienced people who care deeply and people who want to make a difference. And it's a myth that government workers don't care. You know, occasionally you find people who don't care, just
right.
as you find it in the not-for-profit.
Right.
You know, some people treat it as a job, but should never be a job.
Right. Lilliam Barrios-Paoli and I will be back after this short break.
When I need you, I just close my eyes and I'm with you. And all that I so wanna give you, it's only a
You don't have to be a hero to be a hero. When you adopt a child from foster care, just being there makes all the difference.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy, and I'm talking with Lilliam Barrios-Paoli, President and CEO of Safe Space and Chair of Connect. Have the needs of New York City families changed over the years?
You know, basic needs are basic needs for human beings, and we're all very similar in that. But I think for poor people in the city, things have become much more difficult. Housing is a huge issue. I mean, the amount of money that people have to put into housing, it sometimes overwhelms their total income. New York is an expensive city, so that's a big problem.
And it's getting more and more expensive by the day.
It is.
I mean, you know, I feel it now, you know, and I'm a middle-class person. And it's scary.
It's true.
It's really
totally
scary
true.
to me.
You know, the poverty level, according to the poverty standards, which thank God I hope is being updated. It's about $20,000 for a family of 3. There's something called the self-sufficiency standard created by the Women's Center, and according to them, you need $45,000 for
right.
a woman and 2 children to
right.
survive in the
right.
city.
Right.
You know, half of the people that work in my agency don't make that.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
so you know, we even people who are fully employed cannot make ends meet in New York.
You are chair of the board of Connect New York, which focuses on domestic violence. Tell me about what that organization does over and beyond any city-sponsored initiatives.
Connect it's a wonderful organization. I'm very proud of it. Connect essentially believes that domestic violence, that family violence is a community issue, not something that just happens between 2 individuals and the rest of us is none of our business. And so their mission is to really make this a community issue, and they work with organizations like mine, like Safe Space, training the staff on how to detect and work with victims of domestic violence. And you know, about 60, probably higher than that, % of the families who end up in abuse and neglect cases are victims of domestic violence. And for many years, we just kept both separate and never mixed the two.
There was a lot of, seemed to be a lot of attention paid to domestic violence at an earlier period. You don't hear about it so much anymore. You don't hear about poor people so much anymore. Is the amount of domestic violence, has it gone up? Has it leveled off? Has it gone down? What?
I think it's if anything, it's on the rise, because things like poverty and things like substance abuse and so on exacerbate situations of family violence. When you can't make ends meet, you're not in a very good place. So when something happens, you're going to jump at it.
Right.
So we find that there's a lot of cases, except that it's the unspoken thing. I mean, women are embarrassed to talk about it, because most of the time, unfortunately, they believe that they caused it.
Right.
Even if they had nothing to do with it.
Right.
They're afraid. So it's really unspoken. It's very much like child abuse.
And then there's a lot of domestic violence among people who aren't poor.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Among middle and upper.
Absolutely.
Upper middle class
and there's
people.
a lot of emotional violence, not just physical.
Right.
People think it's just because, if he didn't smack you, it didn't happen. But there's a lot of emotional abuse that's going on, and that diminishes women and destroys their self-respect and destroys the self-respect of the family. A child that witnesses domestic, emotional and physical abuse at home becomes an abuser, by and large.
How about shelters and supports for women? I mean, one of the biggest problems is having some place to go.
The problem with the way we deal with domestic violence is that when there's a situation, we take the victim out of the situation. So the oppressor is staying in the apartment or the house. He keeps the residence.
Right.
She gets out and then after 90 days, she's no longer eligible to stay in the shelter. So then most of the time she goes back to the abuser.
So what should we be doing?
Well, I think we have to work with both. And that's something that Connect believes in. You have to work with the men. Whether, it's a controversial thing, but if you don't work with a man and you don't change that reality, either the woman will go back to him and continue to be abused, or he'll just abuse another woman, and the cycle goes on.
Now, my understanding is that even with therapy, it's very hard to get an abuser to change his behavior. Can it be changed, though? I
think it can. Not always, but by and large, I think it can, if they become conscious as to why they're engaged in that kind of behavior. It's very fatalistic to think that once human beings engage in self-destructive behavior, you can never correct it. Then, we have, what are prisons doing? I think we all believe that people can be rehabbed. And I think that's what guides that policy of working with the family as a whole, and the men particularly. They probably abused themselves. They were in an abusive situation. And unless somebody begins to work with them, they'll just continue the cycle.
What are the most overriding problems or situations that both your organizations face on a day? I know that's a big question on a daily basis.
You mean from an administrative point of view? There's never enough money.
Okay.
There's never enough money.
Okay.
Government, increasingly, nobody wants to fund the infrastructure. What do I mean by that? Nobody wants to pay for the electricity, the rent, the accountant, those boring things that need to be done if you're going to be fiscally solvent.
Right.
And so everybody wants to pay for program. But program cannot exist unless you have all of those supports. So trying to get money to just fund the pedestrian stuff that makes things work is very, very difficult.
How would you, do you ever feel overwhelmed by your work?
No, not really. I feel overwhelmed at seconds about things that happen, but not the work as a whole. I'm privileged in being able to work on something I love. Most people have jobs. I've always had a very exciting opportunity to do something that can change somebody's life. So to me, that's really a privilege. Sometimes I was taking my board chair. Sometimes I feel I've been trying to solve the same problem for 30 years. So it gets a little bit demoralizing.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's not the same people, and it's not exactly the same problem.
Right.
But I do believe that we could make a huge difference, and we're just not trying hard enough. I think that poverty, you can eradicate poverty if you really put your mind to it.
Tell me, how?
I think, in New York City, there's 1.5 million poor people. We know who they are, we know where they live, and we know why in many instances they're poor. It's an educational issue, it's a bad healthcare issue, it's a lot of things.
Right.
And I think if we really targeted programs to people with wanting outcomes, dealing with the root causes of what's putting them in that situation,
Right.
I think we could really make a difference. Will there always be poor? Sure, because there'll be new people. But we really could do things very differently. I feel that in social service, we always intervene after the fact.
Yeah.
All of our programs remediate something that already happened. We don't do enough prevention. That was true in healthcare, and we finally got it. That if you wanted to reduce the rate of cancer, you had to do prevention.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing in if a child.
And the city seems to Commissioner Frieden seemed to be very progressive.
Yes,
in that regard.
He gets it.
Right.
He gets it. And I think we could do the same thing in social services. I mean, look, if a child doesn't read on grade level by second grade, that child is going to probably drop out because
Right.
he's going to stop understanding what's going on in the school.
Well, that is an area that the Bloomberg administration is
Yes.
trying to address. But
Yes.
they've been struggling with the public schools for a long time.
Yes, but it has to start in childcare. It has to start at the Head Start level. It has to start at 2 and 3 and getting kids learning ready. By the time they're 5 and 6,
Right.
you've lost a lot of time.
Tell me about a success. Tell me a success. I'm lisping. Tell me a success story that you've had.
Oh, let me tell you a success story in an adolescent, which is even harder. There's a young woman who came to us at the age of 15, pregnant. Her father had thrown her out of the house. She had been living with her mother. The mother felt that she couldn't deal with her and gave it to the dad. And of course, she was totally rebellious and she got pregnant. And she came into one of our group homes with, pregnant. She had a baby, and she was impossible to deal with. Difficult. We usually take kids to colleges just for them to look at. And these are kids who, many of them are dropping out, many of them, but it's sort of like dream a little. She was in one of those college trips, and when she came back, she decided that she really, really was going to change. I've never seen such determination in one so young, and she's a very little
How old was
person.
she?
She was 16 at the time. And she went back to high school. She finished high school. She got a scholarship to go to college. We arranged that the baby should stay with her father, who said he would take her. And she went upstate for college. And of course, there was a series of crazy stuff, she wasn't seeing enough of her baby, so ACS thought that maybe she shouldn't have custody of the baby. That got somewhat fixed, but she came downstate to go to school. Long story short, this is fast forward 3 years later. She's finishing college now. She's looking forward to getting a master's. She's working, and she has a wonderful life. And the baby's great.
Wow. How old is she?
She is now 22.
Fabulous.
And she's gonna make a big difference in everybody's life as well.
Well, I see the photographs of the kids on your Safe Space website. I think what lovely, great, probably really bright kids with such tremendous potential if they only get the right kind of support and encouragement. Is it heart-wrenching when you see kids who are sometimes appear to be so lost, so hopeless, so angry?
Yes, but I've never met a kid that couldn't change. I've never met a kid that couldn't learn. I've never met a kid that really couldn't be turned around. It's up to us adults to do that. I mean, when I worked in the school system at one point in my life, I used to say that I never met a child that couldn't learn, but I met a lot of people who couldn't teach.
Right.
The same thing with, you have to stay with it. Kids are so resilient, it's incredible. It's incredible how resilient they are, no matter what has happened to them. But at some point, they need a break, and they need an adult in their life who's going to make a difference, and a commitment.
Right.
We all unconditional love is precious commodity, but
Right.
that's what children and all of us need in order to thrive.
We're in the midst of a presidential campaign that has sort of galvanized the country. Do you hear any of the presidential candidates focusing on the needs of at-risk families and children?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton, I think because she worked in the Children's Defense Fund, has a great sensitivity towards children at risk and children in poverty. I would say that the Democrats in general are much more sensitive to those things, or at least talk more about those things. I think Senator Obama, certainly having himself gone through all kinds of different things, has the sensitivity as well. Edwards has spoken clearly about poverty and what he would do in terms of changing poverty.
Really the first one to really talk about it.
He's the first one that really made poverty an issue,
right?
Overtly so. So I think among the Democrats, there's much more of that sensitivity. I would like to see many more concrete things being said as to how we can tackle that. I mean, there's 38 million Americans who are poor. There's no excuse for that.
Mm-hmm.
There really is, and about 40% of them are employed, which is
Really?
even scarier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the erosion of the minimum wage and the erosion of the acquisitive power of
Right.
people is huge.
Right.
I mean, you know, money just doesn't go the way it used to.
No, mine doesn't. I'm sorry, but we're out of time. My thanks to Lilliam Barrios-Paoli for joining me. For the City University of New York and CUNY TV, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.